s'arrache.
Il est passé. Super, l'artiste. Super, encore un but sensationnel. That's a brilliant bit of follow-up play by Mahe. Oh my goodness me, what a shot.
Sagosen setter det hen! Han setter den! Vi er i semifinale igjen!
Hello and welcome to the Uninformed Handball Hour. It's International Week. And one of those international weeks that doesn't really matter. We've got big teams playing big teams in friendlies, and we've got little teams playing little teams in second round qualification action. So really, really exciting stuff, but it hasn't stopped handball from producing some pretty big stories, which we'll try to talk about today. It's Alex Kulash here. I'm joined by Chris O'Reilly. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good. Yeah, it seems like this will be the gossip column of the handball world this week, getting the best of the juicy stuff, while some handball of varying importance and quality is taking place, which we might also delve into beyond the juicy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is an international week, but mostly summarized by some World Championship qualifications. So the round before the round to decide who goes through. A lot of that really going to plan. Nothing too dramatic happening there, with the one exception of maybe Israel going through against Georgia, which otherwise the big teams have been playing in tournaments. We've had the Golden League going on in Denmark, and Norway and Denmark fighting it out with Netherlands and USA hanging out as well. We had Germany and Egypt playing, and of course France and Spain with Talant Dushabayev. But the Golden League may not be the hot story, with Denmark resting a lot of their players and kind of trying out new stars. But one big news story that has come out is about the history and the future of Simon Pytlick and his pretty terrible situation with Flensburg. So the big story was broken by Lars Brun Mortensen of TV2, basically saying that Flensburg have rejected a bid of potentially up to 1.5 million euro from Fuchs Berlin to Flensburg to bring Simon Pytlick 1 year earlier in 2026, not in 2027, when he does have the release clause of 500,000 euros. So essentially paying an extra 1 million euro to get an extra year of Simon Pytlick at Fuchs Berlin. And Flensburg's just saying no, which is it's pretty remarkable. But there's a bit more background as to why both sides are making life difficult for each other.
Yeah, there sure is. And I think it all comes back to December 2024, from what I've been reading, and situation with Simon Pytlick in discussion with the club Flensburg. If we go back to that time in December 2024, Nikolaj Krikow was the head coach, and he had this clause very similar to the one he has in his current contract, that he can be released early, but back then the contract stated that he could leave then in 2026, and the club convinced him in December 2024 to get rid of that clause from his contract in a kind of to consolidate the commitment to the club, so that I guess they feel they could build knowing that he'd be part of this team. And he was happy to do it because he knew that he had Nikolaj Krikow as his head coach. Little did he know that 24 hours later, Nikolaj Krikow was then sacked as head coach of Flensburg.
That's wild. I think that's a pretty wild move, which has led to a complete breakdown of relationship between Pytlick and Flensburg as a club. Like, it really feels like the German clubs now, they have money. This is kind of the most amount of cash we've seen floating around in handball for quite a while. And it's been kind of driven by the Bundesliga really becoming kind of a huge league. Handball popularity in Germany continues to rise, so that cash exists up here, and the powers at be in these clubs are starting to it feels like they're starting to take advantage of the naivety of low-level handball. The handball as a sport is so trusting. It's so kind-hearted. It's we talk about, the players are just regular dudes. You can always come up and talk to Simon Pytlick and Matthias Gietzel on the street. They're all nice guys. But when you throw a bunch of money into the equation, the people who control that money and those assets start to get a bit cutthroat. And we obviously saw that in Fuchs of Berlin with the whole Jarn Sievert story. That's another just kind of nice guy who got screwed. We're seeing it in Flensburg. It's all pretty cutthroat. And, that action of the club sitting down Pytlick, going to him, hey, this is great. I know you have a clause in 2026, but obviously we want to work together. You've got your favorite coach right here, Nikolai Kirkau, your good buddy. Why don't we get rid of that clause and see how we go on? You trust us, we trust you. And and his agent again. The agent gets a lot of airtime in that article. They're like, of course, and immediately everything gets torn to shreds.
It's worth noting that after all of that, then the contract was the clause in the contract was reinstated, and Lars Brun Mortensen, I think, gets a lot of credit here because he is not shy on the questions as well, because he asked a very reasonable follow-up of why did you sign a new contract then with the team? And Pytlick's answer to that was basically, he was trying to create some sense of peace within the club and, trying to get everyone on board, still feeling like there was enough in the club to have some success with him as a part of it, which again really speaks to what you were just saying there about the kind of, just these being a bunch of good guys, really, and it's like, we can work it out. We can work it out, and not realizing that Holger Glandorf and Lubomir Vranjes and co are they're not playing ball in all of this. They have their own ideas about what this club needs, and they're not playing ball. And so, I think with all of that and with the money that you spoke about that is being bandied around now, I think the age of players and coaches signing for clubs 2 years or 1 year in advance is going to have to come to an end. And the era of 1990s European football, where these are actually just what they are, transfer fees, are going to have to come into play. And maybe you're going to have to start having, actual transfer windows, times where these things are decided. And at the end of the day, if a player is going to go to a club, it has to happen, right away. You just get it over with. You pay your money, you get your player, because we've also seen it post the initial news of him leaving. Pytlick was on the receiving end of a lot of negative backlash from the fans. And as we're seeing now, a victim is too strong a word here, but, he's also been played by the club here and maybe doesn't deserve the full extent of the chagrin he's received.
Yeah, and I think it's visible in his performances. He has not been the player that we see for Denmark in the major championships for Flensburg this season. Flensburg are having a decent season. That's you can't deny that. They're in second place in the Bundesliga. They're kind of playing to expectations, I would say. But the difference between the position where they're kind of hanging on between second and fourth to actually challenging Magdeburg for the Bundesliga title is a Pytlick in form. If you have Pytlick flying in form, scoring goals, really gathering momentum, you could see Flensburg actually challenge for a title for sure. There's no reason why they don't, and it has to be like a lot to do with the mental aspect, the ease that he plays with, and the like safety that he plays with when he's with Denmark, doesn't translate to Flensburg, and you can't blame the guy. Like, this is a club that he's stuck with for, like, he's now there for, if you're saying that, December 2024 is when trust has been broken, there's a whole year of broken trust and pressure from, from a new coach, from the higher ups in the club, complete mistrust that's got to affect you mentally. And then beyond that, all of these rumors and talks about the Füchse Berlin transfer have led the fans to turn on him in many ways. The fans are bringing up banners, they're chanting, and it's like, this is a bad situation for a player to be in. And you can forgive him that he's not like in perfect form at all times, and we're seeing like a, this is like Britney Spears in her conservatorship. Like, he's trapped. He's trapped in Flensburg, and he's being told what to do, and he still looks normal, but you can tell that he's not normal in these games. So it's a pretty miserable situation. And like, why do you think Flensburg are rejecting this purported 1.5 million transfer bid? Like, if you look at Flensburg, they have Aymeric Mien coming in next year. They already have Gergic. They have Lasse Müller. So, like, with that, you have all the backcourt you need for next season. You have a player that's not happy, and you're just about to get an extra €1 million just to let him go and continue as you plan to continue anyway. Why would Flensburg reject?
It's a very good question.
At this time?
The crazy thing about this, and your comparison to Britney, is the fact that he is actually still playing. If this was, again, referring this back to basically, the only other European sport where there are like transfer fees involved in a similar way in football. If this was, Anthony Elanga with Newcastle to Liverpool, and a player like that just disappears from the team, then they go and play with the under-19s in training. They're not allowed near the senior team. But here he is, like, with all this going on and still turning out and being the number one backcourt player for this team, with all of it going on. So it is almost like he's still being forced to. And maybe the club think they can still get enough out of him. Maybe they think, okay, we're going to be back in the Champions League next season. We need him to be there for that. Or they feel like they can get another 500,000. They push that transfer fees up a little higher. Feel how desperate Berlin are, because it's also giving the feeling that Berlin are really desperate to have him, and you understand why, because Lasse Andersson is gone at the end of the season, and they don't have a backup. They don't have anyone else in mind now, and so I think the Flensburg think that Berlin expected them to accept this and just get their man a year early. Maybe they're trying to squeeze them for a bit more cash, and
I'd be astounded if there was more cash to give. Like, this is one of the biggest handball transfers ever. I think only Karabatic going to PSG for that kind of purported 2 million figure. That, I'm not sure if that was ever confirmed, but that's probably the biggest transfer in handball ever. It's at that level. I think Flensburg seem to be pretty cash rich. Like, whatever is going on, they're splashing the cash. Like, they seem to be okay right now. And I think their main thought process here is, let's screw Füchse Berlin. Because when you look at next year, Magdeburg will be Magdeburg. Kiel are, compiling a team They're getting Makic and Julian Kuster. That's, Kiel could be back on the rise. Flensburg themselves gathering Emerick Mean and Viggo Christiansen. That's
the hot hand.
The hot hand, yeah. The random rocket coming in for Flensburg. I'm really excited by that transfer because for too long, Flensburg have not had a decent right back. Relying on Kirkelucke and Tønnesen this season is not where an elite club should be. And Viggo Christiansen may not be elite, but he doesn't need to be. He needs to do a job. If you have Emerick Mean and Gergic beside you, you don't need another superstar. That's not the setup that you want. So it's a nice transfer. I think that makes a lot of sense. But you have all these teams stacking up, and Füchse Berlin putting all their chips into 2027 with DKM coming in and Pytlick. But if they can force Füchse Berlin to have a disaster of a season without, there's only so much there's only so low that a team can go with Matthias Gietzel in it, but no real left back or no top level left back will be difficult for Füchse Berlin to compete for a proper Champions League spot. And maybe that's all it is. It's just, they want to... What is $1 million for a team that's probably has a bit of money compared to really knocking down your rival? That's my theory on it. But maybe a bit of... Everyone has a number. Everyone has a number.
This will definitely develop as the days and weeks goes on, for sure. This news coming out during the Golden League week, as you mentioned, happening at the lovely Royal Arena in Copenhagen. Denmark using the opportunity to really give a bunch of new caps out, and in particular against the USA, where there was a bunch of new players to the fore in their comfortable win over the US. I don't know if you had a chance to watch any of the games or any of the highlights, but it was interesting to see this kind of test also for the USA, because I think at the end of the day they were the headline act almost in this. The Dutch, the Norwegians and the Danes, all very used to each other and kind of playing exactly the type of games against each other that you would expect. So the big question mark would be how the US men would deal against them, and doing fairly well at times against Netherlands and Norway, losing both games almost identically, 8 or 9 goals, high 30s to low 30s, and then losing quite comfortably to Denmark, which I think you can expect when you put on a second string Danish team. They're almost going to play better against a team like the USA than the first team did at the World Championship a couple of years ago. Yeah, interesting to see the US. Was just kind of important, I think, from a neutral point, to see that with the new coaching team that they haven't fallen off a cliff completely, which is a positive sign.
Yeah, no, it is a good point. Obviously losing an experienced coach like Robert Herdin is going to be impactful for this team, but it seems to have a pretty solid core that it now has the leaders in the team that kind of guide it where it is. I think the question becomes where further can they go? Yeah. It seems to be that this is their core. This is the core that's going to be around until the Olympics. Demagoy Certain is going to be playing at 50 years old and breaking people up in the Olympics, but he's still there as a defensive specialist. But it is, that's their core. It's interesting. Alfred Jonsson was supposed to play in that Danish training camp, and then he kind of disappeared off the scene again.
Yeah, interesting. I've kind of heard some murmurings, but nothing fixed about that. He was called up to the training camp earlier in the year and then wasn't there. So I don't know if he's gotten a bit spooked by something, or some word in his ear that has kept him away, or maybe he just Yeah, wants to. Maybe he also wanted to see them in action and see that he wouldn't be, playing for a team that's going to lose by 20 against the Netherlands, and maybe he will commit after that. I think he's a player at this point who, he can pick his time to join that team if he is going to. But that'll be one to keep an eye out, particularly with another international window coming in a couple of months' time.
And I think for Denmark, they blooded a lot of talent. The likes of Fredrik Bjerre, who's going to Veszprem next year, looked very good on the wing. Norluk and Mats Svane.
Mats Svane, he was like the 17th man at the Euro. Never actually played.
Exactly. Yeah. They brought these guys in and they slotted in like absolutely perfectly. It looked good, and they managed to play a lot of Arnoldson and Hoxer. Like, these are two guys who have not had a lot of consistency with the Danish national team, each one of them facing injuries and kind of coming in and out of squads for the last 2 years, even though they have the quality to play for this Danish team. But that is the part that I think for Denmark, it's the biggest potential, because with Arnoldson and Hoxer, as we saw in the European Championship, that those two are incredible defenders, capable of playing as number 3 defender. And when you have a defensive lineup of those two as number 2 defenders and Saugstrup and Held in the center, it's pretty formidable. It's pretty formidable. That translates directly into an impressive attack, and it's really, really, it's a nice option for this Danish team. I think they looked really good, and the one game that you really do look at in this Golden League is against Norway, and they decimated Norway. They really decimated Norway with that lineup, as I said, with Arnoldson and Hoxer, with Gitzel playing in the center, and that's just an evolution of this team. It's the next level. I always question, who's going to be playing center, and
just put the best player in the world in there. It's fine.
Best player in the world in there to do whatever he wants. So it is. It's a nice evolution for Denmark, and I think the blooding of players is some of the criticism that France have faced for a long time. And the big news over the last little while that we haven't talked about is, of course, that Talant has become the coach of the French national team. And in his words, when he was asked what it feels like to be an international coach again after being a coach with Hungary and Poland, and now for France, in his words, it's like comparing a Fiat Uno to a Ferrari. So we've got Talant Dushabayev in a Ferrari of the French national team. What do you think of that as an unlikely pairing?
Indeed it is, and one which has also come with a bit of criticism, which I can go into a bit as well. But I mean, my first thought was, this is great. I mean, it's for someone like him, he has been a man as a coach who has gone through it all with club and countries that he's coached. He's made the best of tricky situations. He's also had a little bit of luxury at times back in the earlier days with Kielce, and now he gets pure luxury with a French team, and is basically charged now with getting the best out of them. And so why not? I would say the controversy I heard and was reading about was from the coaching association over in France, Seven Master, who shared their unhappiness with the process of selecting him as head coach, saying that there was no, open application, there was no call for coaches. Basically, what I can read between the lines is that the French coaches are not happy that a French coach wasn't picked again to lead this team.
It's the first time in 60 years. As in the 60, this is first time ever. 60-year history of French handball.
So interesting that is their approach to it. It is coming at a time as well where the French Federation is getting a lot of scrutiny. That their president, Philippe Banat, who people may remember if you listen to our chat with Ola Selby back before the IHF elections, is one of the kind of central figures in all of this. And he quite simply gave Talant Dushabayev a phone call after Kielce training one day and asked him, "Do you want the job?" And Talant said, "Well, that's strange, but okay." And so it was quite literally just one old lad calling another one and saying, "Would you like this Ferrari?"
That's pretty incredible. I think there has been quite a bit of controversy in French handball, and maybe that's an area we might dive into in another podcast. I don't know the details, but there was definitely some stories of various levels of corruption and poor business practice from the French Federation. And we've kind of seen France as a handball power diminish over the last 10 years, I would say. Really from the, was it 2017 World Championship in France? I think that was the peak of popularity of handball in France, both from, the men's and women's teams being right at the top, the French clubs performing at the highest level, the French league really gathering momentum and steam. And just kind of step by step, we've seen diminishing levels of popularity in the country to an extent that, it's gone back down to, there's handball people and then there's some people who support the French men's national team. It was more than that. And it's been poor management of handball in the country.
When it comes to the national teams and stuff, there's always going to be great success, as we saw with Paris 2024, the Olympics. But yeah, compared to having that home World Championship in 2017, winning the title, having the Women's Euro the next year, and every arena was full, like for all the games, selling out the massive arena in Paris for the final weekend, and then also around that time 3 French teams getting to the final 4 as well. So it was like the absolute zenith of what it could be. And yeah, I think if we had Kevin Damas on, as he's usually a very steady figure and always knocks down any kind of enthusiasm about where French handball is, I think he would say yes, he would agree that it has also taken a step back in some regard, with no real reason for that to be the case if they kept going the way they were. Of course, the national team still enjoying a lot of success in both the men's and women's teams, and that's where they deserve a lot of credit. But yeah, they could and maybe should be dominating to a whole other level.
I think the example of this is maybe again the Bundesliga and Germany. Okay, so it's a longer history. There's more to back it up, but Germany has entered a period where France maybe was 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, 2017 being the zenith. Maybe 5 years before that, there was the ramp-up period, and what Germany's been able to do is build the Bundesliga, build out the overall kind of media around it, and build the hype and bring attention in, and kind of bring it to the next level. France had that for a little bit, but then just stalled. And I think in French handball, or in France, essentially, basketball has taken a big chunk of the fandom for handball. I think, handball and basketball have always been a little bit hand in hand. If you like one, you probably like the other. Similar sports, and, the globalization of the NBA and Victor Wembanyama coming out of France has made that sport explode in France and taken it to a whole new level. While handball, has kind of stayed where it is. But nevertheless, they've gone through. I think the same can be said for the men's national team, because for the last 10 years, since Claude Ernest and Les Experts and that golden age of French handball, it's felt that the French men's national team has tried to grasp on to the last remaining strands of that kind of beautiful era, where with Didier Denard coming in for an Olympic cycle, 4 years, starting off with a blast, winning an Olympic medal, but then really ultimately disappointing and sticking to the old guys. That's really been the criticism. Like Denard coming in and Guillaume Gilles, 10 years of the same style, the same players, the same kind of expectation, and the same reliance on just star power, physicality, and experience. You know, the fact that Valentin Port just kind of played every single minute of that whole time over the 10 years has been a concern for French handball, and they've stagnated, where, you know, sometimes they do come out, they do get those big victories because they have the talented players, but it hasn't been managed in a long-term perspective. And that's what Talant Dishbaev has come in to do, and he said it himself that it has been too closed off. So his plan is to start getting in new talent, which is he started doing immediately in these games against Spain, giving debuts to players, bringing in, you know, Julian Boss played almost, 40 minutes at right back against Spain. You know, this is a Julian Boss who's already like 29 and has been excellent at the top of European handball for the last 4 years. And in the last 4 years where he has been excellent, I don't think he's played 30 minutes at right back for France because he just hasn't been given the chance. So he's already changing that mindset and, doing what we just discussed with Denmark, giving these players a bit of an opportunity to settle in, because you don't know when the next championship comes around and Nedim Remili is injured. And what do you do? And this is there's some hope here. And
he's the perfect man still to engage in like a deep dive project like this, even with him staying with Kielce until 2027. I think his contract is until then. But even hearing him speak or reading what he was saying to Marca ahead of the games this week against Spain, asking him about his French, because we know Talant Dishbaev is credible with languages, speaks Polish to the players, demands they do the same in Kielce, and asked if he knows some French. He was like, I've started studying, but I don't want to mix my Kielce homework with France right now. After some time, probably in the summer, I'll study for 7 or 8 hours a day. I speak 6 languages, not well, but I speak them. And so he is like, he has no kind of qualms about diving into this kind of thing. There can be no argument against his knowledge of the French players. I mean, 3/4 of them he plays against every week in the Champions League, and 1/4 of them he either currently coaches or has coached until very recently in Nicolas Tournat. So I mean, he has a very strong understanding of the players, and I think it was a time, particularly after how badly the Euro went for France, that they go and they try something else at least, and he will bring a certain like a fiery approach to the team, and maybe they need that to get over themselves a little bit and figure out what they need to do to challenge Denmark.
And I think going back to what Nedzad said in the last podcasts of the Euros, with France are really the only country that's not afraid of Denmark, that can really put it up against them. And there's a danger that France were going to fall back to a place in line with maybe the rest of world handball, where they are scared of Denmark. And I think Talant Dishbaev is the right man to ensure that doesn't happen, to remind them that you bastards are the best players in the world. Like, you will shout in their face and make sure they know that they're the best in the world.
I've never seen Talant sign a Dane That's all I know.
Exactly.
No respect for them. Doesn't rate them.
Yeah. And I do hope that, that there is a world where this is a lovely kind of end of career for Talant Dushabayev. But I do hope for Talant that this is not kind of a short-term punt by France, which is what his international career has been. He's had 2 spells of 18 months leading up to an Olympics for both Poland and Hungary. One of them going successful, with Poland finishing 4th in
Rio.
Rio. And then with Hungary, they didn't qualify, and that was a bit of a disaster. This has a similar view to it. This is France in the middle of an Olympic cycle, making a decision that they should have made earlier, basically giving the reins to Talant to bring them into another Olympics. And I do hope for his sake that it's more of a long-term commitment from both parties for them to continue. He is 57 years old now. He's been at Kielce for a really long time. I think, he's probably considering his future in Kielce, and it would make round out a wonderful career if he kind of finishes up with Kielce in the next couple of years and continues on to France into his 60s. Like that's a good place to spend your 60s for a legendary coach. So it could be a beautiful story, or it could end with the next Olympics. And again, it's a lot to balance. Kielce and France is not an easy combination. So we'll see how that works out. Again, the Dushabayev family has now been broken up, with confirmations that Alex has gone to Gummersbach, Danny Dushabayev signing with Melsungen. So the family has been broken up, and it's a bit of a next step for the whole family. So
from the coach of one of the powerhouses in European handball, who've stuck with their man year after year in Kielce, to their friends over in Hungary, who do the complete opposite almost year after year in Veszprem, who, as we spoke about in the last time we were delving into Champions League on the podcast, that they were in a tricky situation. That tricky situation got even worse for them after a loss to Nantes, where they had a 6-goal lead with 15 minutes left, and an 8-goal turnaround saw them lose that. They ended up finishing down in 5th place in their group, and have set themselves up with a very tricky task to get towards the Final Four. And their CEO, Csaba Bartha, has come out swinging here in the international break, making sure that he and his team stay in the news, maybe not for the right reasons, but reminding his players while they're spread across Europe that they've got some work to do when they get back to Lake Balaton.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, this statement by Dr.
Csaba Bartha.
Of course, don't forget. A PhD in sports science, leading him to this position as the president of Veszprem. He came in 2024 with a kind of an overhaul of the full Veszprem team after being in Győr for 6 years. So he's an experienced head who has overseen a Champions League winning Hungarian side, and has basically transitioned with the club into this setup of Xavi Pascual, setting them up for success. And he had the ultimate combination of sports science and the sporting success as a route to, in his words, to build a sustainable elite structure, and not just yearly roster changes chasing success as categorized by Veszprem in previous years. So it's quite interesting that with that type of long-term plan, just 2 years or a year and a half into the new structure with Xavi Pascual, he comes out with a big statement, putting immense pressure onto the team. And in that statement, he says, "I feel that direct, strong intervention is now needed from my part, but still not in relation to tactics or training. In this spirit, I have made the management decision to apply collective responsibility and strong punishment after the possible failure to meet the goals jointly set at the beginning of the season, of which I have also informed the members of the team and professional staff. The first task is now to successfully complete the Champions League playoff against PSG." So he's basically come in and said, win the Champions League, get to the Final Four of the Champions League, or you're all fired.
Yeah. Facing consequences was the quote that I had underlined as well. I mean, we began this show talking about how handball has moved on in Germany from this, groups of lads and handshake agreements and figuring it out, and how contracts are worth stuff here. Maybe it's not the case everywhere, because this, as you said, suggests something very different. This is not the first time this has happened with Veszprem, where there was actual punishments for players, with certain wages being diminished or held back, or bonuses removed, and maybe this is part of their contracts. Who knows? Maybe there is a punishment clause in there if they don't achieve their objections. But yeah, it really doesn't. It really doesn't read well at all. But the whole atmosphere for the team was pretty brutal. And I mentioned that loss to Nantes, and then in the final round losing to Aalborg, where they were really outplayed by an Aalborg team that literally had nothing to play for. They were already through in second place. They spanked them at home, and it was a toxic atmosphere in there throughout the 60 minutes. And so it's not a surprise that this has come out now. I hate to say it to you, Doctor Chaba, but I think the road to Cologne is not looking very bright, and it's definitely not paved with the yellow brick road anyway, because PSG, potentially a resurgent PSG to face in the last 16, but even if they get through that, which they probably should, it's Füchse Berlin waiting for them in the quarterfinals, which you're going to have to hope for something really special there. Not completely impossible, but Berlin in the Champions League at the moment seems to be a match made in heaven.
It's going to be tough for Veszprem. And at the start of the season, we were both pretty impressed by them. I remember talking about how it did feel like that there's something happening there, and watching that game against Aalborg, the cohesion that was there at the start of the season was just not visible. It really felt like a bunch of players playing for themselves, and it worked out in attack because they still scored goals, because they still have talented players. It looked like a disaster in defense. Honestly, they were. It's reminiscent of training that I just had today, when players, you're training the standard of training is pretty low here in the US, with mixed players, and you have players who are good and experienced but get bored and just start doing their own thing in defense. So running out, trying to get interceptions, stepping up without communicating, leaving gaps where even players who've only played handball for about 6 months are able to break through. Mm-hmm. But they get that one steal and they look good. That kind of mentality was what I saw in that game, and I don't really know what the fix is here, like what Xavi Pascual's plan is. Some of the criticism from Hungarian and Veszprem fans has been quite intense. When the supporters groups start turning against the coach and a team, it starts getting pretty brutal. And one of the comments being that Xavi Pascual just gathered his mates for a last little payday before they all retire. You know, the Ali Zines, the Lucas Sindriches coming in, and Tiagas Petras getting a nice little payday all together in a nice club, and then sailing off into the sunset, which may be a little bit unfair, but it does have the feel of a bit of truth in there. Like,
that's reeks of confirmation bias, depending on which way the season goes for them. You know, exactly. if they get through, it's a case of, you know, bringing in people who understand his tactics, particularly defensively, you know, to guide them through this season. If it doesn't work out, then it's the old boys club for one last hurrah. Only time and the results in the next month or so will tell.
The playoff of the Champions League has been set now. I don't think we've gone through that on this podcast since the last match day. And I do hope you have it in front of you, Chris.
I do indeed.
I do not.
So as we mentioned, PSG and Veszprem, the winner of that takes on Berlin. Nantes against Guingamp, the winner of that, as with any season in Nantes history, is Barca waiting in the quarterfinals. Always seems to be the case. Sporting Lisbon against Płock, which I am very excited by, and the winner of that will take on Aalborg. So that quarter seems very nicely put together. And finally, Szeged versus Kielce, and with Kielce definitely having a resurgent season. They are looking good in that regard, and the winner of that one will take on Magdeburg. So, there's definitely what I like about it, and we did talk about the depth in the middle bracket of the competitions being quite even and quite strong overall. We have in previous years really been burnt by the playoff round, Alex. You know, we've been hyped about it, and then we were like, oh, of course, the four teams that won were going to be the four teams that won. But here there's genuine reason to anticipate that the higher ranked teams will be chasing a deficit in the second leg at home.
There's a little bit of old money and new money aesthetic going on in some of these groups. You know, that the pick Szeged, Kielce and Magdeburg group is your experienced heads, while your Sporting, Płock and Aalborg is your new generation group. But, you know, there are teams here, even the likes of Nantes and Veszprem. Like, you pick any four teams to come out of that last 16, that could be a Final Four.
Yeah.
Like, you can see a Final Four of Kielce, Veszprem, Nantes and Sporting. You can see that happening. And that's rare, I think. I don't think we've seen that level of depth in the Champions League for a couple of seasons now. And, you know, we could be sitting here and with Barca Magdeburg and, you know, in the final again. It could
be,
but it's going to be. I think it's going to be a challenge for both of them to repeat that. And Magdeburg, of course, are falling apart at the seams. After going completely on almost perfect season until their first loss. They're absolutely falling apart.
I'm willing to wait to hold on that one just a little bit. Maybe we'll save that one for a Bundesliga chat to see whether there is any real danger there. But their loss against PSG really, I think it was one of those that was a proper kick up the backside to the second string players, and it was the ultimate kind of vindication for Bernard Wiegert for why he only plays with 9 players. And now it's up to the rest to prove that they should get court time. That's for sure. But I think we'll dive into those playoff matches a little bit closer on the week of the games. They're coming up at the start of. But for this one, I think we can wrap it up here, Alex, shall we?
Yeah, I think so. That was a nice little foray into the stories around the handball world, with plenty more to come in terms of the crunch time of the season.
That's it, and we'll be back later in the week with a morning club as well for all of you on Patreon who are following us there. But until then, take care and goodbye.